Okay, thank you very much. Okay, good evening, everyone. Does everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good, thank you. Okay, tonight is a topic that I'm excited about. I'm always excited, but tonight is especially interesting topic because what's very fascinating is that the way Torah, I won't use the word evolves because evolves implies that it changes, but the way Torah adapts to every new situation. So there never was really a comparable situation like we have now, where all the shuls are closed or were closed, and now slowly we're emerging from hibernation, and we're having our shuls are operating in parking lots. I don't think there ever was such a time in history where that was the case. Maybe on a limited basis, but here it's the whole world is operating that way. And there's a whole host of shilas that came up because of that. And most significantly, in terms of how to handle Kriyas HaTorah. How do you give Aliyos to people? Because not only are we diving in a parking lot, but we are practicing social distancing because of the pandemic. So normally, you know, they call up a person for an aliyah, and he stands next to the balkore, and everybody is happy. But we can't do that. We can't have the balkore standing next to the person has aliyah stand next to the balkore. So what are you supposed to do? So there are, you could write already a few svarim about this topic. There are pages and pages. I saw 4 major treatises on this topic alone, and I'm going to share with you some of the different approaches that the poskim have how to handle this situation. So the simplest approach would appear to be based on Halach and Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says, "Beis Knesset she'ein behem misha de l'kros el echad." If there's only one person that knows how to lane and make the brachas, Yivarach v'yikra ksas psukim, v'yivarach achreim. He should make the bracha before and afterwards. We're talking about somebody, nobody else knows how to even make the brachas. So this one individual who's the expert makes the bracha, Asher bracha bano, and then Asher nasa lanim. When he finishes, he reads the aliyah. And then he goes and he reads a little bit further, and he makes the bracha in the beginning and the end. And that's what he continues doing, as according to the amount of aliyahs that are supposed to be. If it's a weekday, 3. If it's Shabbos, there are 7. So here it says explicitly in Shulchan Aruch that when you're only able to have one person have an aliyah, so he keeps on getting an aliyah over and over again. Now, you might say this is very, very strange, because you're making a bracha on Kriyas HaTorah, and if you're doing so, the person, once he has the first aliyah, he's already made a bracha on the Kriyas HaTorah. So why does he have to make a new bracha when he reads the next aliyah? Isn't that a bracha HaTorah? He's doing it over and over again. He's saying he made the bracha. He keeps on making it. In the end, he makes it 7 times. The bracha batala. He's keeping repeating the same bracha. So the answer is that really Kriyas HaTorah does not require a bracha altogether, because everybody had made a bracha Torah in the morning. So why do you have to make a bracha again when you get an aliyah? What's the reason for that? So the Gemara says the reason is because of kavod HaTorah. Because since you're reading now from a Sefer Torah, so it deserves to have its own bracha. It's more chashuv, so to speak. So it deserves an individual bracha. So the Gemara says initially they would only make 2 brachas. They would make one bracha at the very beginning, and then that would cover all 7 aliyahs, and then the person who had the last aliyah would make the final bracha. But the Gemara said that they were afraid that the people, in the Nichnas and Yotze, people come in, won't realize they'll come late. Even in those days, people came late to shul, and they came in the middle of laning. So people will come late, and they won't know that the bracha was made. So therefore, and they might think you don't have to make a bracha on Kriyas Torah. So Chazal didn't want one person to have such an idea. So therefore, they said you have to make a bracha each time, so that if somebody comes 10 minutes late, he'll see that he's making a bracha. And then you also have to make a bracha at the end. So otherwise, people think you don't have to make it because people might leave early. Again, that's something that nothing is new today. Some people came late, some people left early. So therefore, you have to make the bracha before and afterwards over and over again. So since it's a takonas chachamim to make a bracha repeatedly, so therefore you're allowed to do this. You're allowed to call up the same person gets 7 aliyos, and each aliyah he makes a new bracha because there was a special takonas chachamim. Even though in terms of being yotze, in terms of having a heter to learn, he already made brachas Torah in the morning anyway. So why is he making the bracha again? Because it was takonas chachamim. So if it's a takonas chachamim, that's why even the same person is justified in doing so. Now, the Mishnah Berurah here, so that's an eitzah that many Rabbanim support. Rav Shachter says to do that. I spoke to Rav Shmuel first in Chicago. He said to do that. A number of Rabbanim recommend. I spoke to Rav Shmuel Felder. They recommend this method based on halacha mufareshes, explicit halacha in Shulchan Aruch, that the same person, and this way you minimize contact. The Balkari, nobody has to come up to the Shulchan. The Balkari stands there alone. The Chatchila, you're supposed to have people standing next to the Balkari, but that's only the Chatchila. So the Balkari stands there alone, and he gets all the aliyahs. In such a situation, there's no maftir. I don't have time tonight to go into that, maybe next week, but that's the way it should be done. Now, according to many postim. Now, the Mishnah Berurah throws in a monkey wrench, because the Mishnah Berurah says, the Mechaber is being consistent with his position in Siman Kuf Lamed Tes. In Kuf Lamed Tes, if I could find it quickly, the Shulchan Aruch there's a machlokas, the Mechaber and the Ramah, whether or not a person has to read does a person have to read the Torah? So the Shulchan Aruch here says, Mi sheni yadei likros tzarich limchos biyad shel ya'al Torah. If somebody does not know how to read the Torah, he can't read the words. He shouldn't have an aliyah, because in order to have an aliyah, you have to read the words. Because the bracha is on the kriya. If you can't read it, you can't give him an aliyah. So, and the imtzrichim lazeh sheni yadei likros sufishu kohen alevi ve'ishamach zulaso. But if there's a necessity to have him because he's a kohen or levi, so if if he can repeat like a parrot after the shield tzibur, he knows enough Hebrew to repeat the words, then he can have an aliyah. But if not, he can't have an aliyah. If he can't repeat the words, he shouldn't have an aliyah. And therefore, the Shulchan Aruch says, Suma Eino Kara. What happened to my spotlight here? I lost my spotlight. Suma, all right, maybe I'll find it. Suma, oh, here we go. Annotate. All right, let's do it with the annotator. Suma Eino Kare. A person who's a Suma does not have an aliyah, because he can't. Even though a Suma could be a parakeet, a person is blind. He can repeat the words, but nonetheless, he can't read it from the Sefer Torah. And to say it by heart, it doesn't count. You have to read the words from the Sefer Torah. They say the Balkari has to also be careful. If the Balkari knows the parsha by heart, he can't rely on the fact that he knows it by heart to say the parsha. He has to do it in a way that he's reading it from the Sefer Torah. So the Shulchan Aruch therefore says that a Suma can't have an aliyah. Comes along the Ramah and says the Achshav Kare Suma. Umariel Kosav. Mariel, who was a very early Achron, says that you could have a summa could have aliyah. Kamoshano, makim amaras. Just like we call up an amaretz, somebody who doesn't know how to read anything, he could have an aliyah. So similarly, a summa could also have an aliyah, and somebody who doesn't know how to read could have an aliyah. So what the Mishnah Berurah was saying before that I showed you was that the Shulchan Aruch says that if the people don't know how to read, you should call up one person 7 times because the people who can't read can't have aliyahs. But if you hold like the Ramah that says that somebody who's blind could have an aliyah even though he can't read the Torah, so since he can't read, he can have an aliyah. So therefore, by the same token, you even if this person doesn't know how to read, he could be called up 7 times. You could be called up. You could call up 7 different people, and they'll just stand there like golems, and they'll listen to the Baal Koreh. So based on that, many contemporary poskim say, why should we have to rely on this heter of the Shulchan Aruch that they had the same Baal Koreh gets at least 7 times? We have a different answer. If a person doesn't have to read from inside, so he could stand where he is and get an aliyah. He could stay. Let's say he's 20 feet away. Let him get an aliyah. Say the bracha, and then the Baal Koreh could read. What's the difference between a person who's a summa and he's standing next to the Baal Koreh, or he's standing away? Either way, he can't see. So let him make a bracha. You don't have to call him up. And that's better because this way you can have 7 people having aliyah. You don't have to the Baal Koreh have also 7 aliyahs. And that would be a better way to go. So Yitzchak Zilberstein, who is the son-in-law of Rav Chaim Kanievsky, says, and he's a very prolific author, and he wrote many svarim, and he wrote, I have a very big contrast from him that he wrote on the coronavirus. He says, you should take out a big table, and people should stand on opposite ends. He wants the person who has an aliyah, he doesn't like the idea that he's sitting in a seat because he's supposed to stand near the Baal Koreh because it's supposed to be 3 people with the Baal Koreh. So it has to be, or 2 people, it has to be 1 on each side. Just like by Kabbalah Torah, there was Moshe and Aaron and the Ribbon Shalom. So we're supposed to replicate the Kabbalah Torah. So it has to be 3 people. So what you should do is have a long table that's more than, let's say, 10 feet long or 12 feet long. Let the Baal Koreh stand in the middle. And then on either end, 6 feet away, you'll have the Gabbai. And on the other side, you'll have the person with the Aliyah. So, but he can't read it if he's so far away. He says, Kimika din zelo ma'akev, because Mika din, it doesn't matter if he can't read. Kamosha muta l'suma galos. Since a summa can get an aliyah, so there's no reason why you can't give an aliyah to somebody who's standing 10 feet away. This that the Shulchan Aruch assumes that you can't give an aliyah to summa because you can't read the Torah. The Zohar says you're not even supposed to read the Torah. And we'll see in a minute. That's a big machlokas, whether the person has aliyah, is he supposed to read along or is he not supposed to read along? So the Shulchan Aruch says that. So Rav Zilberstein says that you rely on the heter of summa. The Ramah paskins a summa can have an aliyah. So by the same token, you could give an aliyah to somebody who's standing 10 feet away. Now, according to the Sfardim, the Sfardim always follow the position of the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah follows the position, the Ashkenazim follow the position of the Ramah, but the Ashkenazim follow the position of, the Sfardim follow the position of Rav Yosef Karo. So the Rav Yosef Karo, the Shulchan Aruch passing, assume it can't have aliyah. So for the Sephardim, you can't do this Eitzah. The Sephardim have to rely on the Shulchan Aruch that says that the Baal Koreh gets 7 aliyahs. But according to Ashkenazim, they don't have to do that, and he could call up somebody who's 10 feet away. But he should be nearby, so it should be called that he's surrounding the Baal Koreh. That's what Rabbi Zilberstein suggests. Comes along Rav, and you see how beautiful this is. The poskim are familiar with other poskim say, and not only do they have their own elaborate Torah, but they also comment on each other. And there's a Pilpul Daraisa. It's like people learning Mecharusa. He says this, they say that. So there's a back and forth. So Rav Asher Weiss, who I have from Rav Asher Weiss, I have these huge contrasim. He has. I'll just show you, for example, Rav Asher Weiss. This is Madura. What is this? Madura Tinyana. This is about 150 pages on the coronavirus. And then Rav Asher Weiss, when the coronavirus started, so there was this little booklet that was about 50 pages. And now came out another booklet, which is another 100 pages. I had it printed before Shavuos, so I had plenty of reading material. And here I have, this is from Rav Zilberstein, the one that says that you could call up a summa. He has in here also about 150 pages. It's just magnificent the way the Rebbeinu Shalom is very proud, I'm sure, that Klal Yisrael, the way they relate to the situation, and they're able to take the principles in Torah. They're not changing anything, but taking the principles and they're adopting them to this situation. So we have the Rabbi Zilberstein's suggestion is that you should stand far away and you can give an aliyah because you're not worse than a summa. Says Rav Asher Weiss, Mikol Nira, Kevin Ladas, Rov, Poskim L'cham Mishnah Oli Yosef B'di'eved, Afimena Korei. Okay, I don't know. That's not what I wanted to show you. No, it's not this piece. It must be this piece. Okay, here's the piece. Umasha Koseves Echel Migdalim became Shinagim in Ashton Halasuma Latara. He's addressing the porch minyanim that they had that they had in Lakewood and other places. Oh, here's the spotlight. Let me get the spotlight. Okay. No, I didn't get it. Here it is. So he's addressing the porch minyanim. So he said that some people say, based on what Rabbi Zilberstein says, that you can give aliyah, you can have 10 people on 10 different porches, put the Sefer Torah on one porch, and call for aliyah somebody on the other porch. So he says he doesn't like that eitzah. He says because ain't there cloud and become sarach la'alos Torah lama yada Sefer Torah. There has to be an aliyah. You can't give a person aliyah if he's standing 10 feet away. That's not called an aliyah, even though he's standing on a porch, so he's high up. He's elevated, but that's not aliyah. You can't do that if you're far away. You can't. It's not considered to be an aliyah. So he doesn't agree. He doesn't say who said it, but he says Echel Begdolim. He probably heard it from Rav Zilberstein. Rav Zilberstein felt that it's called an aliyah. Maybe Rav Zilberstein felt that if you're at the same table, even though it's far away, it could be considered to be an aliyah. But Rav Asher Weiss is not happy with that. What does Rav Asher Weiss say you should do? He says, Mikol Nira, the cave in the Das Rov Poskim, Uvachom Mishabura, Ola Yosef B'di'eved Afimena Karei. Since most poskim hold, like the Ramah, that a summa could get an aliyah, the Harinogel Halas Gamas Sua, the cave in Shevishasta Kanaskini, Yeshlin Al-Khatir Sha'oli Yisrachiv Al-Karei, Af Imla Aidei Kach, or Yuchel Krom Mitachasab. So he says, okay, so you see, maybe he even agrees to Rabbi Zilberstein. He's talking about where what I just showed you, Rav Asher Weiss says he doesn't like the eitzah, the giving a person aliyah on a separate porch. Maybe that's because he's on a separate porch. But he says, let him stand nearby, and that's called that he has aliyah. And then he says in parentheses, even though I said that you can't give a person aliyah if he's standing far away, but tzarach lalos is kar will say Torah. He says, "Kan achein ohu Torah alsham miksas v'rach v'eni achol across v'dam v'tegel." He says if he's nearby, so maybe there's no disagreement between Rav Asher Weiss and Rabbi Zilberstein. If he's nearby, that's called that he has an aliyah. But the chiddush here is that the person with the aliyah doesn't know, that doesn't see a thing. He doesn't see any of the words, and nonetheless he can have an aliyah. So that's based on this on the fact that the Shulchan Aruch paskins that a summa can have that the Ramah passes the Summa can have Aliyah, and it would still appear that for the Sfardim, it's not a good Eitzah, because the Sfardim hold that a Summa, they hold like the Shulchan Aruch, and the Shulchan Aruch says that a Summa could not have an Aliyah. So I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit and just share with you at the end of my booklet that even though you would think that the Sfardim are knowing, like the Shulchan Aruch, that a Summa should not have an Aliyah, but the Ben Ish Chai, not Ben Ish Chai, the Kaf HaChaim, who is a Sfardi, says, it's a commentary in Shulchan Aruch, Summa Nikari, he says, Ramoran Pasak Kesvar Sa'oshim, even though there are those who say the Summa could read, but the Shulchan Aruch paskins that the Summa cannot read. And then he says that the Harav Maram Siyos, and I don't know who that is, one of the Sfardi Gedolim, Shinago B'chol Eretz Yisrael Halo Summa L'Sefer Torah U'Lokas Psak Maran. The minig in Eretz Yisrael, even by the Sfardim, is that they do give aliyahs to people who are blind. The Kachos of Harav Mary, I don't know who that is, somebody else. The Chenu Minag Kol Eretz Yisrael Hat Aliyah Summa L'Sefer Torah. And he says, and in the Sefer Takanos Yushalayim, there was a sefer where they instituted special takanos for Yushalayim. So there it says, Shenogim Yushalayim, the Asuma Ola Sefer Torah, that even Asuma can have an aliyah. So even the Sfardim are perhaps able to follow the position of the Ramah, because there were Sfardish poskim that were in favor of letting Asuma have an aliyah. And I think part of this has to do with the fact that it has to do with sensitivity, because if you don't let a Summa have an Aliyah, it's very painful for the Summa. Imagine somebody who's a Summa and he has this disability, and let's say he's a young man and he's having his bar mitzvah, and the Rav will say, sorry, you can't have an Aliyah because you're blind. That'll be devastating to the young man. But this is not a new problem. Here's a tshuva from the Masas Binyamin. The Masas Binyamin was a contemporary of the Beis Yosef. He lived a little bit after the Beis Yosef. He has a tshuva about this topic of whether a summa could have an aliyah. It's a long tshuva. It's about 15 pages. I printed it out. I didn't have time to read through the whole tshuva. And he tells you why he's writing a tshuva about this topic. He says, Kizeh ata le'esik nasi. Now that I'm old, choshchu haraos, I don't know what that word means, uribis. In my eyes, I can't see, but he went blind. Also, the Mishnah Shal Rav Zal, according to what the Rav is the Shulchan Aruch. According to what the Shulchan Aruch concludes, Yegarsheni milastape benachos Hashem b'Torah emes. I'm going to be chased away from being close to in the basking in the presence of Kadosh Baruch Hu and His Torah. Why? Levilti echoshev v'misper hamenuyim laos. I won't be able to get an aliyah. Ulchein amarti v'gamarti b'livi chalil li milazal derech eitz hachayim. Chas v'shalom, I'm not going to allow myself to leave the eitz hachayim, the tree of life, u'leheachos b'chanfera, and to hold on to its branches. Ahafti zos te'uda. What does he say up here? He says, okay, and he says, even though I'm old, I'm not going to be quiet. And he says, I'm going to go examine, why did Beis Yosef do that to me? Why did the Beis Yosef, Rav Yosef Kairo Paskin, that I can't get an aliyah? And he has this long tshuva where he presents all the different positions at great length, and he explores who holds what. And in the end, he concludes that it's okay for a summa to have an aliyah. So you see, even in the halachic literature, there was enormous sensitivity. The Masas Binyamin he was a great Talmid Chacham, but he was an older man. He was blind. He couldn't see, so he felt excluded. So therefore, he went and he wrote a long tshuva justifying that a summa can have an aliyah, and that the Masas Binyamin is even quoted by the Magen Avram in the Shulchan Aruch. The Magen Avram, if I could find it, no, I don't know where it is exactly, but the Magen Avram quotes the Masas Binyamin, and he says the Masas Binyamin and others say that a summa can have a, oh, here it is. Next page. Sorry. Okay, here. Summa Shulchan Aruch. He's going on the Shulchan Aruch that says Summa Eina Kare. Summa can't read because he can't read the words, and he says Amasas Biyamin Herech L'Alchiach. He wrote at length to prove She'ida Sheshich Tzibur Kare Mutar Koso. As long as there's a Shich Tzibur, he could listen along to Shich Tzibur. And he quotes a lot of poskim, the Aguda and the Matei Moshe and the Levush and the Bach. They all paskin that it's okay for a summa to have an aliyah. So you see already the tension that exists over this shayla. Not only is there tension, but the position of the Shulchan Aruch seems to be contradictory, and that is very surprising, because you would assume that the Shulchan Aruch would be consistent. This issue, whether you have to read along with the Baal Kari, do you have to read from the Sefer Torah? So the Rush discusses this at some length, and the Rush says, the reason why the Baal Kari, in the time of the Gemara, the people who got the Aliyos used to read themselves. Why is it that the Baal Kari reads from us? He says it's so that people shouldn't be embarrassed, because they'll get up there, they'll call for Aliyah, and they won't know how to read. So the Rush says, the Hasam Nimno Milavi Bikurim Vavra Mashikos Vitar Abel Hacha Bikin Yakro Vehachem Yimno. The Gemara by Bikurim, the Gemara says that they made allowances for somebody who didn't know how to recite the formula for Bikurim, that he could also bring Bikurim, because otherwise they'll be about the mitzvah. So the Rush is there, it's a question of being about the mitzvah. But here, if somebody doesn't know how to read, so let him not get an aliyah. Why do we have to accommodate him and let him have an aliyah? So, and not have to read. So he says a different reason. He says, in there, time with Vishena called Bikiyam B'Taimei Kriya, because not everybody knows how to read. There are certain people that think they know how to read, but they don't know. He thinks that he could. And if people say, yeah, you can't get an aliyah because you'll break your teeth on the Ibra and we won't be outside, so then it'll result in a big fight, which is, in shuls, that's one of the old traditions. So he says, that's why the Institute let somebody who knows how to read, let him be the Baal Koreh, and then there won't be fights over who should get an aliyah. But then he says, the person has an aliyah has to read along with the Baal Koreh. He has to look inside and read along. If somebody gets an aliyah and he doesn't know how to read, it's a bracha livatala. And he ends up saying something that's very crucial here, pivotal. He says it doesn't, even though this, maybe you'll say the bracha goes not on, he doesn't know how to read, but let him make a bracha on the Shich Tzibur's kriya. So he says you can't make a bracha on the Shich Tzibur's kriya because it's not his kriya, it's the Shich Tzibur's kriya. Let the Shich Tzibur make the bracha. But if he can't read, you can't call him up to an aliyah. So that's the position of the Rosh, and that's the Beis Yosef quoted the Rosh, where the Beis Yosef said that if somebody doesn't know how to read, then you should not give him an aliyah. The Torah quotes the Rush as well, that that he explains the reason why we call people up is so that because people that don't know how to read shouldn't be reading the Torah. And he says, the Torah quotes that part of the Rush, that if a person doesn't know how to read along, it's a bracha livatala. So the Beis Yosef quotes a whole slew of poskim that talk about this. He says, Ken Kasa Rush. The Rush says you have to read along with the Balkare. The Rush says, like we saw in the Rush before, that if he doesn't know how to read it, he can't rely on the Balkare. It'll be a bracha vatala. Also, the reason why can't he say? So what if he doesn't know how to read? Why can't he just say it by heart? He says because the Kriya has to be mitoch haksav. So if he doesn't know how to read, you can't give somebody a leave if he doesn't know how to read. And then he says v'chein kasav shibu halaket, v'chein kasav harivash. He says also mash in the Rambam, and he says it's not like the Muki Yosef, because in the Muki Yosef says that that akume yinish achrinish shapasei v'roa basuma maven mevarach l'omer b'tzil shabbat. The Muki Yosef says no. Assume a blind person could have an aliyah. And he says you should not rely on those shittas. So the Beis Yosef clearly establishes his position that a summa should not have an aliyah. So the Darkei Moshe, the Darkei Moshe is the Ramah, wrote the Darkei Moshe on the tour before he wrote the Ramah, his commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. So he says here, Umario Kasav Nogan Likosuma, Gosevitar V'Liner and Divrei Beis Yosef. The Ramah says that the Mariel says you could call up a summa, but he says I agree with the Beis Yosef that you cannot call up a summa. So the question is, it's a tremendous problem. The Darkei Moshe and the Shulchan Aruch are one and the same person. And in the Shulchan Aruch, the Darkei Moshe says that a summa could have an aliyah. Where is that? Well, I showed it to you before. In the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah says that a summa could have an aliyah. He quotes the Mariel, and he says that's the halacha, that a summa can have an aliyah. So how's it possible? Here it is. Umariel Kosev the Akshav Kare Suma. Kamoshano Makrimitaro Lamaras. That you could call up a summa. So how's it possible that the Ramah says that you could call up a summa, and in the Darkei Moshe, which is a commentary on the Torah, he quotes the Mariel, which he quotes in the Shulchan Aruch, but he says he agrees with Linear and Divrei Beis Yosef. He agrees with the Beis Yosef. I'm going to enlarge this for you. Give me a minute. I know I have to move this over. And where's the, oh, I thought I could enlarge it. I'm sorry. Okay. So anyway, okay, if Etty was here, she would know, but I don't know how to do it. So anyway, so there's a tremendous theory here in the Mariel, in the Darkei Moshe. In the Darkei Moshe, he writes to the Summa should not have aliyah. And he's convinced by the Beis Yosef's arguments, because the Beis Yosef quotes the Rosh and the Rivash and the Yeshiva Aleket and Rabbeinu Yerucham, and he's the only one that says the Summa could have an aliyah besides the Mariel is the Muki Yosef. So therefore he goes with the majority, he goes with the flow. But in the Shulchan Aruch, he argues with the Shulchan Aruch and he says the Mariel says he could have aliyah. It's a pella. So some people want to say that this is not the words of the Darkei Moshe didn't write this. Somebody else put it in. Somebody decided to amend the Darkei Moshe, maybe, and they wrote it into the manuscript, but he didn't say that. But this Darkei Moshe is quoted by the Magen Avraham and others, so it's hard to accept that type of explanation. So what you have to say, here's what you have to say. You have to say that the Darkei Moshe, maybe after he wrote this in the Shulchan and on the tour, B'li near Divrei Beis Yosef, that the halachos like the Beis Yosef, maybe he was accosted by people that said to him, "How could you do this to us? We have people. I'm blind, or I have people in my family are blind, or my son's blind, and you're not allowing us to have an aliyah." And they were extremely hurt by that. So maybe the Ramah reconsidered, and because of the just like I showed you the tshuva before, the Ramah reconsidered, and he said, I showed you the tshuva from the Masas Binyamin, that the Masas Binyamin, when he became blind, he made a battle against the Beis Yosef. He says, I'm going to prove that a Summa could have aliyah. So the Ramah perhaps changed his mind, and he decided that a Summa could have an aliyah. Now, even so, and you understand the reason why we're discussing Summa so much is because this issue of what you're supposed to do for the while we're having the social distancing minyanim, should you have the Baal Koreh read all 7 aliyahs and make the bracha, or could you have somebody stand 6 feet away and make a bracha? That all revolves around this discussion, whether a Summa could make a bracha or a Summa can't make a bracha. If you can't read the Torah, could you make a bracha, or you cannot make a bracha? Now, even within the Beis Yosef himself, who says that a Summa cannot have an aliyah, that's how I just showed you the Beis Yosef. He quotes all these poskim, and he says, you shouldn't rely on the Muki Yosef. He says the Summa could get aliyah, and that's why in the Shulchan Aruch he passes the Summa could get an aliyah. So there's a tremendous stira in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Beis Yosef also. Just like there's a stira in the Ramah, there's a stira in the Beis Yosef, because the Beis Yosef has a discussion about when somebody gets aliyah, is he supposed to read along? When he has aliyah, is he supposed to read? The person who has aliyah should read along. So we saw before the Rush says that he has to read along, because otherwise it's a bracha v'atala. So, but here in the Beis Yosef, he says, Rabbeinu Haggadah Maria Avuhav. Maria Avuhav lived maybe 100 years before the Beis Yosef. If you've been to Tzvas, there's the Avuhav Beis Knesses, but I saw on the internet that they're not sure that the Maria Avuhav never was in Eretz Yisrael, so probably was not a shul that he built. Maybe there was a different Avuhav that built the shul. So he says, Shemati shekasav b'sefer Zohar she'ein likos klal el echad. The Zohar says that only one person should read the Sefer Torah. If somebody has an aliyah, so you have the Baal Koreh, you have the person making the bracha, it's wrong for the person making the bracha to read along, because the Zohar says you're not supposed to deliver. If the Zohar really said that, then you should do like the Zohar says. Why does he say it if the Zohar says that? Shani lo re'isiv kasav el shemata. I never saw the Zohar inside, but I heard that that's what it says in the Zohar. They didn't have, in the time of Maria Avuhav, they didn't have HebrewBooks.org, and they didn't have Otzer HaTorah and Otzer Chachma and all these apps that you could have 10,000 or 50,000 svarim. So he didn't see the Zohar. He heard about it, but he didn't see the Zohar. So so he says, so that's what the Maria Avuhav says, that the Zohar seems to say that only one person can read. And then the Beis Yosef says, "V'nia kosis uchisi lemotzo v'hu b'parshas vayakel." Beis Yosef says that he found the Zohar, and the Zohar is in Parshas Vayakel. And then he quotes the Zohar. I'm not going to read it to you because I don't understand the words. The Zohar is written in very difficult Aramaic. And then after he quotes the Zohar, he says, since according to the Zohar, only the Baal Koreh is supposed to read. And we were knowing like that the Baal Koreh should be the one that there's a Baal Koreh who reads. So all of us is also likros. So the person who has a liyah shouldn't read along. Apple Pishit, the Divi Haposkim Sarach Likros, Vimlo Yikra Kosvo, the Habi Bracha Batala. Even though he just, the Rush himself, the Beis Yosef himself quoted the Rush and the Rivash and the Shiboli Haleket and Rabbeinu Yerucham that said that if you don't read along with the Balkarei, it's a Bracha Batala. But nonetheless, the Rush says, don't follow those positions. You shouldn't listen to them. You should do like it says in the Zohar, because the Zohar, and even though the Maria Avuv says he doesn't know for sure if there's a Zohar, but the Beis Yosef says, I found the Zohar. I know the Zohar. So he says, follow the Zohar. He says, even though they say that it'll be a bracha Torah, what happens if you have a machlokas, the Bavli and the Zohar? So you paskin always like the Bavli. You don't paskin like the Zohar, which is Sefer Kabbalah. It was written by, presumably by Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. That's what most people hold. But not, who was a Tana, but nonetheless, we don't pass the Zohar against the Bavli. But he says here, it doesn't say explicitly in the Bavli that you have to read along. That's the Chiddush of the Rishonim. The Rosh says it, and the other Rishonim, because they hold it to be a bracha Torah. So he says, since it's not in this with Talmud, lo shafkina divrei hazohar, mibnei divrei haposkim. So therefore, we don't follow the words of the Zohar when there's the position of the other posting. I just want to get my annotator set up again.
We do follow the words of the Zohar.
What?
You said we don't follow the words of the Zohar. You meant we do.
I'm sorry, we do. You're correct. We do follow the words of the Zohar. So now the Beis Yosef has to deal with a major problem. Those that said that that a summa can't get an aliyah, and those that said that if you can't read, you can't have an aliyah. You have to read along. So they said the reason is because it'll be a bracha b'Torah. So the Beis Yosef says, according to the Zohar, that you're not supposed to read along. It's also to read along for Kabbalistic reasons. So what happened to the bracha b'Torah problem? So he says a simple answer. The kol sha'olah shemei ma'ashashir sibakare mechavel libo advarv hareyu kekare the shemeya ka'oneh. As long as he's reading and listening. So we have a principle, shemeya ka'oneh. In everybody's house, Friday night, the Baal Bus makes Kiddush, and his wife is Yotzei, and the children are Yotzei. How are they Yotzei? They didn't make Kiddush. Or Kriyas Megillah. There's one person that reads the Megillah. Everybody has a chiyuv to read the Megillah. How are they Yotzei? The Yotzei with Shemeya Ka'oneh. That hearing is like saying, that's a Torah principle. If you hear somebody make a bracha, or if you hear somebody lane, it's like you lane. So because of the principle of Shemeya Ka'oneh, therefore, you're Yotzei listening. So the Beis Yosef himself now provides us the solution why a summa should be allowed to have an aliyah, because of Shemeya Ka'oneh. And if you hold that like the Mariel and the way the Ramah passes is that a summa can have an aliyah, it fits right in with the Maria Avuv that says that the Zohar, goes to Zohar, that the Balkare is the only one that should be reading. The person has aliyah shouldn't be reading. So therefore, if the person who has the aliyah is not supposed to read, so why can't a summa have an aliyah? And it'll be Yotzei with Shemeya Ka'oneh. And therefore, it's better for the person who has aliyah not to read along with the Shich Tzibur. So now you're sort of left with a tremendous contradiction. The Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef, in the Shulchan Aruch, Paskins and the Summa should not get an aliyah, and somebody who doesn't know how to read should not get an aliyah. And here he quotes the Zohar. It says that even if you're not a Summa, you're not allowed to read along, because the Zohar says that two people are not supposed to read. Only one person should read. So then he says, he says maybe you could read. You could read. The person has aliyah, and the Zohar is not saying that you have to read. It's just saying that you're not allowed to. It just means that you don't have to read. But if you want to read, you're okay, as long as you don't read out loud. If you read quietly, then nobody can hear. And he says, and that's the way a person has aliyah should read along quietly. He shouldn't read loud enough that people should hear. And that way, he's Yotzei the Zohar. The Zohar says that you're not supposed to read. He says the Zohar maybe means that you shouldn't read out loud, but you should read softly and quietly. But you still, if you just saw this Beis Yosef, you have the strong impression. He says, the Zohar says not to read. He says, but maybe the Zohar, you're allowed to read. But he doesn't say that you have to read. And yet, in the Shulchan Aruch, he paskins that a summa should not read. So here we have the reverse. The Ramah in the Darkei Moshe says he holds like the Beis Yosef, the previous Beis Yosef that says that the summa should not get aliyah. And then when it comes to the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah flips, and the Ramah says the summa could get aliyah. And here we have, and I suggested that the reason is because maybe he saw the enormous pain that was causing people who were blind and had a disability. So maybe he felt, okay, let's rely. There are shittas that hold that you could read a summa, even though the majority of the poskim don't hold the way. Let's rely on das yochid because it's a tremendous, because of the pain of the people. But here the Beis Yosef goes the opposite way. The Beis Yosef here says that you don't have to read along, and it would follow, therefore, the summa could get an aliyah. But in Shulchan Aruch, he paskins that a summa should not have an aliyah. That's what he paskins here in the Shulchan Aruch. That a summa eino korei lefisha also likas osach shalom in eksav, because you can't read shalom in eksav, and he's not happy with his explanation that he gave in the Beis Yosef of Shemaya Kaona. So you see that there's this tension here. There's a big machlokes whether summa could read or can't read, and it's not clear exactly which way. The Beis Yosef seems to change his position. I mean, the Beis Yosef was written before he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, so apparently he changed his mind and he decided to be more machmir when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. Maybe, I'll tell you a story. Maybe the Beis Yosef maybe really felt that the main halacha should be like like all the poskim that he quoted. It's like the Rush that says that you have to read, and therefore summa can't have an aliyah. But then, when he saw the Zohar, maybe he also was influenced by the fact that he had people who were blind that complained that you're excluding us, like the Master Binyamin says, you're excluding us from Klal Yisrael. So maybe he decided to be lenient. But then maybe afterwards, his conscience bothered him, and he thought that I'm being influenced by personal considerations, and that's not the way to pass an halacha. So maybe that's why, by the time he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, I don't know how many years later, he changed his position, and he decided that a summa could read. So, bottom line is that, and even the Mishnah Berurah makes note of the fact that there's this tension, and that it's not even clear how come the Ramah changed his mind from the Darkei Moshe, because he says, Uladina Kasar Hako Kamario. The Acharim said we pass like the Mario, who's the one that says that a summa could read, and that somebody, when he gets an aliyah, should read along. But he says, you shouldn't call somebody who's blind for Parshas Para and Parshas Zachar. Why is that? So in the Sha'ar Tzion, he says, because since the Mario is quoted by the Darkei Moshe, and the Darkei Moshe says Shlonir Lokain, so he says he doesn't hold that way. So even though the Ramah here says that is the halacha, like the Mario, but in the Darkei Moshe he himself says it's not the halacha. So when it comes to Parshas Para, which some say is the Raisa, Parshas Zachar, which is the Raisa, so we don't want to rely on the kulos and allow a summa to read. So now I'm just going to show you one last thing about this issue of summa, and that is okay. And here I just want to show you the Shulchan Aruch when he brings the halacha of what are you supposed to do when you have an aliyah. So the Shulchan Aruch says, Tzarech likros benacha shelo yashmiya la'aznav. He should read it quietly, because that's how the Shulchan Aruch is explained. That's how he explained the Zohar. That even though the Zohar says you shouldn't read out loud, he's reconciling the Zohar with the Rush. The Rush says that you have to read, because otherwise the bracha atala. The Zohar seems to say that the person has aliyah, should be quiet. So he reconciled by saying that the Zohar also means he can read, but he should read quietly. And therefore, and that's how he passes the Shulchan Aruch, that he should read quietly. And then, but the Ramah says, "Afil mashmil asav lecha mechash." The lo other mitfila. Ramah says that's not true. You could read it loud. I didn't show you, but the Ramah disagrees with the Beis Yosef, and he in the Beis Yosef's interpretation of the Zohar, the Darkei Moshe says, I don't agree with the way he explained the Zohar. There's no raya from the Zohar that you can't read out loud along with the. This is the Darkei Moshe. The Ramah says that there's no proof from the Zohar that you're not allowed to read along with the Balkorei. So that's the extreme you have. The Beis Yosef, in order to make to align the Shulchan the Rush with the Zohar, the Shulchan Aruch says that he made a compromise. The Zohar says you should read quiet. You shouldn't read. It just means loudly, but you could read quietly. Whereas the Ramah sides with the Mario, who holds that a summa is allowed to have an aliyah, and in order that the Zohar shouldn't be and therefore he doesn't have a problem explaining the Zohar in a different fashion. So now the last thing I want to show you is this Mishnah Berurah, which Rabbi First brought to my attention. I asked Rabbi First, is it okay to have distant aliyos? Rabbi First is somebody I consult with all the time, and he's a posek in Chicago, but he's a posek for Rabbanim across America. So I asked Rabbi First, is it okay to have the Balkorei they'll call up 7 people and they'll stand 6 feet away. They won't read inside, and they'll be Saimech on the Ramah. The Ramah says you could follow the Mariel that says that even if you don't see it, you could be Yosei. And that's what Rabbi Zilberstein said, that according to and also Rosh Weiss, they both said the same thing, that since the Summa could read, so therefore a person who can't see the Sefer Torah is not worse than the Summa. And therefore he could stand far away and he could be Yosei. So says the Mishnah Berurah, the Shulchan Aruch here says that the person who has aliyah he has to read along, so it shouldn't be a bracha atala. So the Mishnah Berurah asks the question, the Shulchan Aruch that says that you have to read along, so it shouldn't be a bracha atala. The Shulchan Aruch is l'shitaso. He's consistent with the fact that he says that a summa can't get an aliyah. So you see that it's necessary to read. He holds like the Rush, the Shulchan Aruch, that if you don't read along, it's a bracha of atala. So, and that's why he says here the same thing, that if the person who has an aliyah, even if he could see, but if he doesn't read along, it'll be a bracha of atala. But here, so the Biur Halacha asks, how come the Ramah didn't disagree? The Ramah disagreed with the Shulchan Aruch when it comes to summa. He says a blind person can get an aliyah. So you see, he holds you don't have to. It's not a bracha atala, even if you can't read. So how come he didn't disagree over here also? He says, "Hineg lefimai the pasuk Ramah le'el the nogin likros summa v'amaretz afsheni yachlu likros imken haylo lagos gam kan." He should have argued over here also that even if you don't read out loud, you could be yosei. So he says that it must be. He says that the Ramah only relied on the Mariel who says a summa can get an aliyah le'inyan summa v'amaretz. For a summa and an amaretz, he was willing to rely on the Mariel. Why? If you won't give them an aliyah, they're both going to be embarrassed. The summa, the same as I saw the svara we saw before, the Master's B'yamin. The summa is going to be very embarrassed and dejected. And if somebody's an Amaretz, if somebody doesn't know anything, so it's Rachmanis, he doesn't know anything, he didn't get to go to yeshiva, and he doesn't know how to read along. So you're going to tell him, sorry, you can't have you can't have an aliyah. That would be terrible. We'd be embarrassing him. So for those two, and also they'll make a big fight if they don't let them have an aliyah. So therefore, in order to avoid that, the Ramah allows a summa to have an aliyah, so that he shouldn't be embarrassed. So here again, you see that even the Ramah is the consideration. And so now it makes more sense what I was saying before. That makes more sense, but this supports what I said before. The Ramah in the Darkei Moshe says that he holds like the Beis Yosef, not like the Mariel. The Summa can't get an aliyah. The Shulchan Aruch says the Summa could get an aliyah. So I said that maybe originally he thought that the halacha follows most of the Rishonim, but in the end he passed like the Mariel because he saw the people who are blind. It's very painful for them. Not that it'll be embarrassing and painful. So now we see that even when in the Ramah, when he says that a summa can get aliyah, he's limiting it to a summa. But if a person is not a summa, if a person is capable of reading the Torah and he doesn't read along, then the Ramah agrees to the Shulchan Aruch that if he doesn't read benachas, it'll be bracha levatala. So therefore, the Ramah agrees that a regular person has to read along. So Rabbi first said, so you can't tell me that we're going to have distant aliyahs and rely on the Mariel, at least according to the Ashkenazim, because the Mishnah Berurah himself says that was a unique heter for a summa. So you'll say, okay, but here also, with social distancing, we have no other eitzah. So what are we going to do? So we should say maybe it's the same as a summa, but that's not true because I showed you at the very beginning there is another eitzah. So the other eitzah is the Baal Karei should get all 7 aliyahs. So the Rav Asher Weiss says that we don't want to rely on that. If you don't have to, it would be better to have a summa have an aliyah. So here it becomes a question of weighing the balance. According to Rav Asher Weiss and Rabbi Zilberstein, they hold that this eitzah of the Shulchan Aruch that we saw in the very beginning, that the Baal Karei gets all 7 aliyahs, that is a big b'diavad. And therefore, if you have to choose between the two b'diavits, what's better? That the Baal Karei should have all the aliyahs, or they should give an aliyah to somebody who can't see, and he'll be like a summa. So they felt it's better to let it be like a summa, and therefore you can give him an aliyah with social distancing. Whereas Rabbi first felt no. Mishnah Berurah says the Ramah is only mekel for a summa, so we're not going to be mekel if it's not a summa. So therefore, it's better that the Baal Karei should have all the aliyahs. I have 1 minute. Last thing I have to tell you is what?
Minchas in 10 minutes.
Minchas in 10 minutes. Oh, okay. If you have to leave, leave. I just want to say one last thing. What's the issue? Why should you not say? The Rosh says that if you don't read yourself, you're it's a bracha Torah, and the Beis Yosef says that those that say that a summa ki aliyah, they hold it's not a bracha Torah because of Shemei Kona. So why does the Beis Yosef also? Why don't the other Rishonim subscribe to? Why doesn't the Rosh subscribe to Shemei Kona? So the Yavitz, Rav Yaakov Emden says the reason is there's a reason why you can't say Shemei Kona, because the only one who's supposed to be making the bracha is the person who has aliyah. Everybody else that's there, they're all listening to the Torah, but they're not supposed to make. There's no chiyuv on them to make a bracha. There you go. With brachas Torah they made in the morning. Chazal made a special takana that the person who has aliyah has to make a brachas Torah. So if he's going to be a shomeya, if he's just going to listen, then he's no different than the rest of the audience. So you have no justification for him to go ahead and make a bracha. He's doing like everybody else. So if he's not reading it, there's no justification for him to be able to read. He has to be reading it himself, and then it's justified for him to have a aliyah. Okay, this is part 1 of the shir. Next week I'll tell you the other eitzes that the other poskim. But you see, look how fascinating it is. look at all this Torah that, and it all, the foundation of all this discussion is already there in all the poskim, and for hundreds of years they've been arguing over this issue of Summa, but how it plays out for a social distancing aliyah, that's all new, and that's what the contemporary poskim are arguing about. Okay, those of you who have to go down, go ahead, and it's a pleasure to see everybody as always, and I wish you a very wonderful evening.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Oh, the Parnassus.
Yeah, hi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
From Pittsburgh, okay.
Okay,
Oh, everybody's unmasking themselves. Wow, it's good to see you.
thank you. Okay,
Okay,
bye. I'm going to Daf Yomi.
go ahead. All right. Good to see everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. This is the best part of this year when I get to see everybody. Okay, everybody should be well and healthy, and we should hear good news. Okay, have a good night. I'm going to stop the share. Okay, and end meeting.